Clara wakes up early every day. The alarm goes off at 6 a.m., but in truth, she's already been awake for some time, lying there staring at the ceiling. The faint morning light seeping through the cracks in the curtains barely illuminates the room, but to Clara, this darkness is all too familiar. She rises slowly, as if the weight of time pulls her down. 7 years have passed, yet Paolo's absence still feels like a ghost she silently carries. In the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee fills the air, but it no longer brings the same comfort it once did. The coffee cup was always a symbol of the time she and Paolo shared, but now, she sits alone, staring at the rising steam, as if hoping to find answers there. His photo still hangs on the wall in the living room, taken on a summer afternoon, his smile frozen in time, as if the accident had never happened. The restaurant where she works is modest, visited by regulars who know her by name, yet Clara always feels invisible. The constant flow of orders, the polite smiles, the muffled sound of conversations, all are part of a routine she performs without thinking. Yet amid this steady movement, there is an unsettling sense of emptiness, as if something essential is out of place. She keeps herself busy, believing that time would ease the pain, but some wounds never truly heal. As she serves a family at one of the tables, Clara finds herself imagining, for the 1000th time, what her life would be like if Paolo were still here. But it's a question without an answer. And it's in that silence that she learns to exist. The restaurant was the same as always, the clattering of cutlery, laughter in the background, and the muffled sounds of the kitchen at work. Clara moved between tables with her usual efficiency, greeting the regulars with a mechanical smile. But that afternoon, something made her stop. In the farthest corner, almost hidden in the shadows, sat a man, head down, fiddling with a folded napkin between his fingers. He hadn't ordered anything yet. Clara thought about leaving him alone for another minute. Maybe he was just waiting for someone, but something made her change her mind. Without knowing why, she felt a slight shiver when she saw him. He seemed familiar, but Clara couldn't place why. She tried to shake off the feeling as she grabbed her notepad and slowly walked over. "Good afternoon. Have you decided what you'd like?" Her voice came out softer than usual. He raised his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. Clara prepared to jot down the order, but froze in place. The man's gaze, there was something disturbingly familiar in it, something that made her feel as if the ground beneath her had disappeared. The man gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Clara noticed he wore an old watch, something that reminded her of Paolo. She looked away for a moment, but the discomfort lingered. Her hand trembled slightly as she waited for him to speak, but the man seemed more interested in watching her. "I'm still deciding," he replied, his voice soft but carrying a strange gravity. Clara nodded, feeling an inexplicable tension growing in the air between them. She turned to leave, but an uncontrollable urge made her look back, as if somehow this man held a secret she needed to uncover. Clara tried to return to her routine, but the unease remained. That mysterious customer seemed to carry an odd, almost suffocating presence. Trying to shake off the whirlwind of thoughts, she decided to return to the table. She needed some kind of answer. Maybe after hearing him order something simple like a cup of coffee or a meal, the strange feeling would go away. She approached with her notepad in hand, maintaining her professional composure. "Have you decided yet?" she asked, trying to mask the tension in her voice. He lifted his gaze again, and this time, his eyes held hers in a way that made it impossible to look away. His smile grew, but it was subtle, almost imperceptible, as if he was sharing something with her that only the two of them could understand. "Clara," he whispered, almost inaudible but loud enough for her name to hang in the air, freezing time around them. Clara stopped. Her body froze. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. That voice. There was something about it, something she knew intimately. Her mind raced for answers, but all she could find was a single memory, a memory that had haunted her for 7 years. "Paolo?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. She hated herself for it, for saying her dead husband's name. It couldn't be him. It wasn't possible. But then the man in front of her leaned forward slightly, the enigmatic smile still on his face. "Yes." Clara's notepad fell from her hand, but she didn't even notice. Her body was frozen while everything inside her crumbled. How could this be? She had seen the coffin buried herself. She had cried, spent sleepless nights as his absence consumed her soul. And now he was here, in front of her, alive. Clara felt her head spin, reality distorting. Her mouth went dry, her hands trembled. What was happening? She stepped back instinctively, her body moving away from Paolo as if the truth he brought was a poison. She stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief, and at the same time, with barely contained fury. 7 years. 7 years spent in deep mourning, believing that the man she loved was dead, and now he was here, sitting before her, as alive as ever. The silence between them was heavy, only broken by the faint hum of conversations around them, but Clara could hear nothing but the rapid beating of her own heart. "You didn't die?" The words came out with effort, a mixture of anger, pain, and confusion. She wanted to scream, to shake him until reality made sense. Paolo lowered his head for a moment, as if gathering courage. Then his eyes met hers again, and he spoke with a calmness that made her shiver. "I never died, Clara. I faked it all." Clara couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had loved him, trusted him more than anyone else. And he abandoned her, made her go through the hell of losing the love of her life. Why? The question came out more like a scream, causing some customers to look in their direction, but Clara didn't care. She didn't care who was watching. All that mattered now was understanding. I couldn't stay. There were things, situations I couldn't involve you in. I didn't want you to get hurt, so the only way out was to disappear. He sighed, as if the words weighed on him. I faked my death to protect you. Protect me? Clara laughed, a bitter laugh devoid of any joy. Protect me from what? From grief? From the pain of thinking you were dead? From spending 7 years believing I'd lost the man I loved? Paolo lowered his gaze again. Clara could see that he wasn't ready to tell her everything. There was more, something he didn't want to reveal. And that made her even angrier. Why are you here now? Why did you come back? Clara's voice trembled, her hand still clenched into fists. I owe you this, Paolo said, his voice quieter, almost pleading. I owe you the truth, even if it's not the whole truth, and I couldn't stay away anymore. Not after everything. Clara stepped back, her heart torn between the love she still felt and the anger that grew with each word. She didn't know whether she should listen more or throw him out of her life for good. Clara walked through the narrow streets of the city, as if drifting in a sea of confused thoughts. The air around her felt heavier, suffocating. Every step she took moved her farther from the cafe, but the truth was she couldn't escape what she felt inside. Paolo's return had reopened a wound she believed had been closed for years. Her mind was at war. How could he just come back like this? As if everything she had suffered wasn't real, as if the pain of those years didn't matter. She vividly remembered the funeral, how she had to keep living without him, and how the grief had consumed her. But now, the man she had buried in her soul was alive, and everything she thought she knew was shrouded in doubt. Clara's legs trembled. Stopping at a corner, she leaned against a building wall and closed her eyes. Memories of Paolo flooded her like a storm. Happy moments of them together. The laughter, the plans, the dreams they had shared. But now those same moments seemed distant, almost unreal. How could she trust him again after everything? Her mind wouldn't stop spinning. He lied, faked his own death, she repeated to herself. And what if he was lying now too? Maybe this story about protection was just an excuse. Maybe he was hiding something darker, something that could hurt her again. Clara no longer knew what to believe, and that terrified her. The faces of people around her became blurs. Clara was alone in her own world, facing an internal battle. Paolo's return had brought back not only the love she still felt for him, but also a deep mistrust. He had messed with her mind, and now she questioned. Was she being manipulated, or was he truly trying to protect her? The next day, Clara found herself at the same restaurant, her hands trembling slightly as she held the tray. Every customer who walked in made her heart race, but she knew it was Paolo who was about to appear. And indeed, he arrived. Silent, without any fuss, as if he wasn't the ghost who had turned her life upside down the day before. He sat at the same table in the same corner. This time there was no surprise in Clara's eyes, but there was a weight, a mixture of anger, hurt, and strange curiosity. She took a deep breath before approaching. Paolo looked up and without further ado said, "I owe you the truth, Clara." Those words echoed in her mind as he began to tell his story. Paolo explained that 7 years ago, he had gotten involved in dangerous debts with people who didn't forgive mistakes, the kind of people who wouldn't hesitate to use violence to collect. When he realized his life was at risk, he saw only one way out: to disappear. "I couldn't just run away," he said in a low, somber voice. "They would have come after me. Or after you." Clara felt the weight of his words, but the anger still boiled inside her. "And that gave you the right to leave me alone? To make me think you were dead?" Paolo lowered his head, a sigh escaping his lips. "Clara, I know how much I hurt you, but I thought it was the only way to protect you. They believed I was dead, and over time, the threats disappeared. I came back because I'm free now." Clara felt a knot form in her throat. He spoke sincerely, and the logic of his words made sense, but it didn't erase the fact that he had abandoned her without explanation, leaving her to face the pain and grief alone for so many years. "Coming back now doesn't change what happened," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "You left me, and I had to learn to live without you." Paolo watched her, knowing there were no words that could heal the scars of what he had done. But at the same time, he seemed genuine in his desire to win back something that might already be beyond his reach. In the silence of her home, Clara stared at the ceiling, Paolo's words echoing in her mind. He was back, alive, and everything she had built since his death seemed to collapse, like a house of cards hit by a gust of wind. The next day, she couldn't carry the weight alone anymore. She called her closest friend Sophia for coffee. Sitting in the corner of the cafe, Clara poured everything out at once, without filter, without pause. Sophia listened with wide eyes, unsure if she was trapped in a soap opera or if this was really happening. "He just came back, Sophia," as if nothing had happened. "As if it was normal to fake your own death and reappear 7 years later," Clara said, her voice trembling between disbelief and frustration. Sophia shook her head, processing the story. "Clara, this is absurd. I'm not saying he doesn't have an explanation, but you went through so much. How can you even consider hearing him out?" Later, she spoke with her mother. Donna Marta was calmer, someone who knew life with all its twists and unpredictable pains. Clara found her on the porch sitting in her rocking chair. When she heard the story, her mother didn't show shock or anger, just a distant, thoughtful look. "Dear, sometimes people do terrible things out of fear. That doesn't justify it, but we can't understand what goes through someone's mind when they're desperate. Only you can decide what to do now. Maybe you deserve to hear what he has to say." Her mother's words reverberated in her mind. Clara didn't want to admit it, but part of her still loved Paolo. Part of her wanted to understand. But at the same time, she knew that opening that door could reopen deep wounds. The past, which she had tried to bury for so long, was now right in front of her, demanding that she face it, and there was no running away. Clara walked into the restaurant where it all began, the same place where her life was turned upside down, where the unexpected had returned to haunt her. Paolo was already there, sitting at a corner table just like the first time. His expression was that of a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. She took a deep breath and walked toward him, her heart beating faster with each step. "Thank you for coming," he said softly as she sat down in front of him. There was a heavy silence. Clara watched Paolo's every movement, trying to decipher his intentions, his truths, and his lies. No matter what he said, she couldn't erase the abandonment, the grief she had lived through. the emptiness he left behind. "I don't know what to say to make you understand," Paolo began, his eyes lowered. "I know what I did is unforgivable, Clara, but I was so afraid of being killed, of not being able to protect you. I didn't know how to handle it, so I ran. From everything. From you." Clara felt a mixture of anger and sadness. His words rang true, she could feel it. But was that enough? What else could he say to erase the pain of all those years? "And you think coming back now fixes everything? You think you can just sit here and apologize as if nothing happened?" Her voice was firm despite the turmoil inside. "No. I know it doesn't fix anything," he replied sincerely, finally meeting her gaze. I wanted a second chance. Not to go back to what we were, but to try to be someone better. I want to be the person you deserve if you give me the chance." A tear rolled down Clara's cheek. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to believe it was possible to start over, but another part knew that trust had been shattered. The choice was before her, like an abyss. Forgive and risk reliving everything, or move forward alone, never knowing what could have been. And the decision, she knew, would change everything. Clara took a deep breath, looking at Paolo one last time. The memories of a life they once shared still danced in her mind, but now they felt distant. She realized she wasn't the same woman she was 7 years ago. The love she once felt for him was still there, somewhere, but it had been corroded by the pain and the emptiness he left when he walked away. The betrayal of his absence was a wound that, though healed, would never truly disappear. "I can't, Paolo," Clara said, her voice breaking as the words came out. "I can't go back to what we were. You left me alone, and even though I understand your reasons, I can't erase what I went through after you left." Paolo remained silent, visibly affected. He knew this was the end, even though he had come seeking redemption, desperately hoping for a second chance. "I loved you," Clara continued, her eyes filling with tears. "But I need to move on. What you did, it destroyed something inside me that I'm not sure I can ever get back. And I think, as hard as it is, I need to set myself free from you." She stood up slowly, gazing at Paolo one last time. With a mix of relief and sadness, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Paolo and the past behind, ready to finally move forward with her life. As Clara walked through the streets of the city, she felt the soft breeze touch her face while the sun set on the horizon. There was something different in her chest now, a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The tears that once fell from her face were now tears of relief, not pain. The meeting with Paolo had reopened all the scars she had spent so long trying to hide, but instead of destroying her, those scars had set her free. She finally understood that her life didn't have to be tied to the past. She had carried Paolo's ghost for so long that she had forgotten what it was like to look toward the future with hope. The love she once had for him was real, and it always would be. But it was no longer enough to stifle her desire to move on. For the first time, Clara didn't feel defined by the absence of someone. The hole that Paolo had left had, in some way, been filled by the strength she had found within herself. As she walked, Clara looked at the people around her. Each face told a story. Each step was part of a different journey. And in that moment, she realized that the world was still full of possibilities. Life hadn't stopped when Paolo left. In fact, she was just beginning to understand what it meant to live fully. With a small smile on her lips, Clara looked up at the sky. There was something promising in the air, a sense that the future was finally in her hands. And for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to embrace whatever came next. What would you do in Clara's place? Would you accept Paolo again as if nothing had happened? Leave a comment below to tell us what you would do, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.